Hi, this is Stacey Mahoy with StaceyMahoy.com. Today I have a really cool and special guest, another sports mama here, Joy Acaso. And I actually first was introduced to Joy via the Sideline Radio podcast. So I heard her on that podcast with Shaki. So thank you, Shaki, for introducing me to Joy.
Yay.
And I was immediately interested in her and what she had to say because she's parent-child relationship specialist. And I, in recent years, have been much more focused on strengthening and building parent-child relationships within my own family. So it was really cool when I saw that. I was like, oh, somebody else that's really, focused and specializing in that area. So welcome, Joy. Thank you so much for being here and doing this with us.
No, thank you, Stacey. Thank you for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit more about your story and kind of how you got into that area of expertise?
Yes, so I've been in the counseling field for many years, and I actually started as a youth leader. So I would help families and things like that, and teenagers. That was kind of my specialty in the beginning, and then I went back to school and got my master's in social work, and then I just kept going in counseling. And then as I started to counsel a lot more teenagers and children who had the diagnosis of like depression or anxiety, even defiance or ADHD, those childhood disorders. I learned that you can't really treat the child without helping the parents. So I said, oh, wait a minute. And even before diagnosis, like children who were exhibiting like low self-esteem or lack of confidence or not being able to handle their emotions very well. So not necessarily to a point of a disorder, but just, everyday things. I found that it was more effective when I partnered with the parents as well.
Right.
And so I said, okay, the parent-child relationship is really important. It doesn't matter how good the professional is in helping the child, but if there's such a disconnect with the home and the professional setting. So I wanted to bridge that gap.
That's very interesting because last year I knew I wanted to kind of work with families, encourage families, and kind of just because youth sports can get really crazy. And with all the stress and the tension and parents are feeling a lot of pressure too, if we're not really mindful, it can cause a lot of tension within the family and kind of break down relationships. And so, I was looking at, I really want to help families make sure that this experience is something that pulls them together and strengthens their relationships rather than kind of tears it apart because of all of the, that it just gets really intense at some points, right? So, people have like programs to help athletes excel or goal setting and all these sorts of things. And I know every parent wants their child to do well, right? They want to try to do the best for their child and get them all these resources. They pay for instructors and they pay for private lessons and this sort of thing. And for me, I was like, I really actually want to work with the whole unit, right? Not just this child, because this one father had reached out and he was like, oh, we're going through this thing. And I was like, well, would you be interested in getting on a Zoom call with me, but not just your child, like you and, the parents and the child, because I also feel the same thing. Like, no matter how many tools we give this child to try to, with their mindset and this and that, sometimes as parents, like as helpful as we're trying to be, I feel like we're doing some things that really aren't as helpful as we think. And so if that's still going on, and the child is working really hard to do their thing, but then the parent is still, unknowingly a lot of times or inadvertently saying or responding in ways that kind of slow their process down. That's kind of what I wanted to address, was just like kind of bring more awareness up as to how much their own mindset and their own responses to various situations has an impact on their child too, and how well they move forward or sometimes it actually interferes with their learning process at times when you're
Yes.
not even realizing it. So it sounds like you felt kind of the same way about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that there's a lot more influences now, right? As our children are growing up, there's a lot of things that we didn't deal with when we were growing up, I'm
Right,
sure. But there's also, like, I remind parents, there's a way for you to bring your influence to the forefront
right,
of it all, and it doesn't have to be like a tug of war or like a push and pull
right.
type of thing. And I like what you said, that it should be something that brings us closer together and um not divides us. So yeah, there is definitely a way to do that and to strengthen.
So one thing, because I hear this a lot also from even parents of younger kids, because there's the screens, right? They're worried about what their kids are seeing and all these things, and they're like,
Mm,
"Oh, my kids are picking up bad habits when they go to school, and when they, and they're feeling a little frustrated because, like you said, they're worried about all these other influences teaching their kids things that they don't want." And one thing that another mom told me, and you have a lot more training in this, but she told me, she's like, you need to focus on relationship first. You need to make that a priority above everything else, because that's what gives you that connection to where your child is most if they're most connected to you and their relationship with you is stronger than every other relationship, then you have a little bit more of that pull, is what kind of I was
yes,
learning. So is that kind of what are some ways, okay, what are a few simple ways that you feel that parents can keep more connection, and so that therefore more influence? Because even in coaching, we say that a lot. It was like connection equals influence. Like the more connected you
yes,
are with your team, the easier it is for you to transfer information and knowledge, and they're more
yeah,
able
absolutely.
to receive it, right? So,
Right, right.
so what have you run into, or what are some things that you've seen to be helpful for parents?
Definitely. One of the things that I say is that rules without relationship leads to
Mm.
rebellion. So
Yeah.
you can't always be about the rules, and we can't be too rigid. It's just not going to work in this time period, like,
Yeah.
because it's just a different time now. You can't always just talk about, okay, this is what we're going to all about. Structure is good. So it's true that children thrive in structure.
Hmm.
Children thrive in an environment where they know what the boundaries are. But it has to be communicated. It has to be communicated well. You cannot assume that your children already know. And this is what I find, when I work with families, like they just think, like, well, they should know better.
Hmm.
But maybe they don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe they don't know what you
Yeah.
expect of them to begin with. So
Right.
have those conversations, and then the relationship part has to be an everyday thing.
Yeah.
It has to be an everyday thing. I was working with a family this week, and the dad said, so she has a daughter. He has a daughter. They have a daughter and a son, and he grew up in an all boys home.
Oh, wow.
So the daughter now is a teenager, and she has a lot of emotions, as we all do. And he was telling me, like, but I can't stand the drama. I can't stand hearing, like, all the things that she's saying about this and that, and I just hope that it's not affecting her schoolwork. And I told him, I said, but this is just her talking about her feelings, and the
Mhm.
drama, quote unquote, is just an indication that she is human and she is alive.
Yeah.
Like, that's all there is to it. And she's not a robot.
Right.
you know he has feelings and opinions. And then he said, okay, okay, so I get that. And so, like, spend time with your children in getting to know them.
Getting to
That's the
know them.
relationship part
Yeah.
you know
And I think it's actually kind of cool that she actually feels safe enough to express all those things,
Yeah,
in her
that's
own.
true.
But some kids
Exactly.
don't, right? So that's actually a positive. I try to remind parents, like, that's actually a positive when your child feels safe enough to express things, even though they know you're not going to agree with it, or they know that it's not going to make you happy. but they're still able to, say it. Maybe we can still guide them and help them learn how to do it more, respectfully or whatever, and communicate better. But it's
Right.
actually a good start that they're free. They feel free enough to express what they're truly feeling.
Right.
So when you talk about the structure, because I hear that a lot too, is like, no, but kids need structure and they need this, and I think that is true. I think it's very difficult when someone just has no idea what to expect and things are just being thrown at them. It's very confusing and frustrating, of course. But I think that a lot of times we're just taking it over to the other extreme, and it's like everything is super rigid, like you were saying, and they feel that the structure is the most important thing rather than like that relationship. So I think,
Right.
and that kind of makes it tilt weird and,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
frustrates the child
Definitely.
too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I definitely think the communication thing is very important. And there's something else that you were saying that it'll probably pop up in my head later. But so I wanted to also ask about, as far as when it comes to parents and children and their relationship and connection, what are some things that you've seen that might be kind of breaking down that relationship or weakening it without,
Uh-huh.
like, parents aren't even noticing that that's putting a wall up between them or distancing
Right.
their child? What are some common things that you see happening between parents and children?
So what I see happening a lot these days is that mentality of my job as a parent or my role as a parent is to push you
Mm,
so you can be better than us, so you can accomplish
right.
more than us, right? So when the parents like that I work with, they tell me that, I get it, I'm an adult, right? like uh, that to me, I receive it. Yes, I understand, what you're saying. You want them to succeed and everything. But to but children receive that very differently. They're like, okay, like they have no idea what that means. Like,
Yeah.
first of all, children live for the here and now. We
Mm-hmm.
live for the future. Like, we see it, we want to think about it, and children are just, whatever's in front of them, that's all they think about, that's all they see. That's not to say that we can't talk to them about the future, but we have to like rephrase it, and we
Mm-hmm.
have to approach it in a different light. And so that my role as a parent is to push you and things like that. Like, let's step back a little bit and try and understand them instead, and where they're coming from, and then
Right.
guide them to to the right path. So instead of saying, I'm actually doing this campaign inside of my Instagram that's called Speak Life.
Yeah.
So which means that, like, really watching our words. So I love that you had said, Stacy, that sometimes we say things and we have no idea that it's actually hurting them more
Mm-hmm.
than it's helping
Helping.
them.
Right.
So one of the things I said in there is that when we say, like, oh, like, let's say our kids come home and they show us what they did at school today, or even the sports, our little athletes, they say, like, oh, I broke my record, or something like that. Maybe it's only 20 seconds, right? But for them it's a big deal. And then we say, like, oh, I'm so proud of you, but I know you can do better.
Mm.
That But I know you can do better, we cannot be saying that in the same breath. Like, can we like can we just say reserve it for another time,
Mm-hmm.
right? But instead of saying that, we can say things like, oh, I'm so proud of you, you worked hard for this, and
Mm-hmm.
your efforts are really paying off.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe later on, when things are calmer, and then when you're having snack or yogurt or something like that, then you can slip it in and say, oh, like, what are your goals this year? What do you plan to do better? That kind of thing. But you can't be saying, like, I'm proud of you, but I know you can do better. I ask the teenagers that I used to counsel, and they said, and this is why big advocate for that, because they told me themselves that that does not encourage them at all, and it does not motivate them. It just makes them feel less than, and it makes them feel that they're not
enough.
ever going to be good enough.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then they feel defeated and discouraged in a time where they kind of should be feeling a little bit more motivated,
Right.
probably.
Yeah.
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 And I think it's interesting what you're saying, because the whole rules without relationship and rebellion is something that I'm very familiar with through experience. And then it's not that there was no relationship. It's just that I never until, 17 years in, even realized that relationship should be a priority, or like is like the number one thing. Now for me, it's like the number one thing. Before I felt like it was my job as a parent to make sure you did this, this, and this, and to make sure,
Right.
like you said, like we push
Me
you
too.
to success, right? Like, and I'm the parent, and I know what you need to do, and so I need to make you do that. Like that was my perspective, and now it's very, very different. And so, yeah, I got to experience some of how that goes when you try to just do rules, and then and your that relationship piece is not it's not that. I mean, obviously every parent loves their child, and every parent
Right. Yes.
shows
Absolutely.
that, at least we feel like we do. But then I just discovered that there were a lot of things, a lot of interactions in which maybe my kids weren't feeling that on their end because of the way that we responded to certain things. And it wasn't that we were like super negative about it. At least it was, we felt like we were just correcting, right? Or we were,
Right.
right, trying to show
Yeah.
them, okay, here's where things could be better. But like you said, it's received so differently than what we think or what we intend.
Right. Like intent. Yes.
Right, and what we
Exactly.
intended. And so, yeah, I come to learn that regardless of what my intentions might be, it's really important for me to be mindful of how they're feeling, what's going on with them, like you were saying, and how they're receiving it, because it's not effective if I'm intending one thing and they're receiving something completely different. And just like in the situation you just said, like, oh, I'm so proud of you, and you think that's a positive thing, and then you say,
Right.
but I know you can do better, and you feel like you feel like you're communicating your confidence in them to be amazing, but that's not what they're
Yes.
feeling,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that was like really a huge aha moment for me. And, and then you talked about that need to push. So one thing that I get a lot from parents is that I don't know when I should push my child, and I don't know when to back off. They're afraid that if they don't push, their child's going to come back later and be like, oh, why didn't you make me do that? Why didn't you push me? I could have been this, or I could have done that, and there's that fear. And so they feel like they have the best choice is for them to just push. So do you feel like that's ever necessary to go that route, or is there another option that's probably like more helpful long term?
Yeah. Right. So long term, so we need to think about long-term effects, right?
Mhm.
Um, we want, especially with athletes, especially being a sports mom, like I think that we want our kids we want to make sure that our kids find satisfaction, like inner satisfaction, and that they're not looking for approval outside, and that they're not basing their self-worth on how many trophies they get,
Mhm.
or how many accolades and recognition they get. And that can be, that can be done like simultaneously as they are, progressing in their sports life. They can also be building up that confidence in themselves, and knowing that their self-worth does not depend on whether they win
Right.
or lose. So it is a fragile, like kind of thin line of like, do I push, or do I, what do I do, or do I back out? Um, I believe that as you connect more and as you have those conversations cannot just happen um, during the intense moment, like during a game or after a
Or right
game
after.
that you're starting. Yes.
Yeah.
And you're having that conversation. No, have that conversation spread out, like throughout, throughout the week and off season. You should be talking about goals and what they think about, their future. And here are 3 words that I want parents to know is tell me more. So whenever they come to you, even if you disagree, okay, even if you disagree, maybe they're like, for whatever reason, they're starting to feel like they want to quit, right? And as sports moms, we
That
don't want to
happens.
hear that.
Yeah.
Or even different scenarios. Like I had a mom who told me that her daughter is thinking about getting a tattoo, and she's like, absolutely not. And I was like, I get it, you don't have to explain this to me, I am a parent too. But even when you disagree, just say, okay, well, tell me more. Like, what do you mean, by that? That gives you time to kind of figure out what you're gonna say after they give you their whole spiel, and then you can do your rebuttal in a nice way, obviously, but you have to give them the space to explain themselves. Don't meet them head to head. I know it's gonna be, at times it's difficult, but those are the magic words. Tell me more, because especially like the teenagers, they just want to be heard.
Yeah.
They just want to talk, believe it or not.
Right. And so that's something that I have to work on as well, because before it was like, well, I'm the parent, so what I say goes. And so I felt like I was the one that should be doing most of the talking. And
Yeah.
I'm learning that listening is a big deal, and that
Yes,
really getting
yes.
to know them and understand what's going on with them and how they're feeling, what they're going through, and just listening. And then I heard someone once say, listen, when they're talking, listen, and then when they're done, they're like, listen some more. So that tell me more.
Yes.
It's really helpful, because
Yes.
I want to just like jump in and be like, and so tell me more is going to be helpful for me, so that I can kind of even take it a little further and give myself more time, like you were saying, to think how to respond versus wanting to get into an argument right away, right? Like whenever I see that meme about you don't have to attend every argument you're invited to or whatever, I think about my teenagers. I'm like, like as a parent, like as an adult, you're like, oh yeah, this, but like as a parent with your own kids, I try to remind other parents too, when they're really frustrated, they're like, oh, everything is a battle and this, and I'm like, well, you don't have to attend every, you don't have to engage in that way just because your child is feeling whatever they're feeling. And so
and sometimes too, like I think that we react too much, and then we want to like we answer out of fear or out of anger or out of stress. So if our sports, if our little athletes tell us like, oh, I'm so frustrated and this is just really annoying for me, and then we respond to say like, well, what do you mean, like, but we have to keep ourselves in check and say like, am I having a bad day right now? Why am I responding? We got to put ourselves in check to make sure we respond well too.
Yeah, it's definitely been helpful for me to take a look at what is it that's really bothering me. Like when I'm quick to respond in those ways, like what is it that's the actual stress that I'm feeling? Is it something else that has me worried and stressed out? And so now my child brings me this, it's like a tipping point, So that's been a good thing for me to be mindful of, is just what are the actual stressors in my life. And if it's not really my child, then they really shouldn't be the ones to take the brunt of that, those feelings from me. And so getting to the root of that for me has been important. And then you said something about, just, allowing them to feel heard. I hear a lot of parents who get really frustrated, especially in the teenage years. They're like, me and my child used to have this close relationship and we could talk about anything. And then now they're teenagers and they don't want to listen. And they, I don't know anything, right? Like that's super common.
Right.
And almost every time when a parent is feeling like my child's just not listening to me, and I feel like I can almost guarantee you that that's how your child is feeling too, that you're not listening to them, being
Yes.
heard,
Yes.
right? So they go, how do I get my child to listen? Like, well, you need to listen. Probably the best thing is to listen, for you to listen first, and
Right.
make them feel heard. Even like you said, even when you disagree, right? A lot of times parents will, okay, I let them say this, and then, but the first thing I do is, yeah, but, and then you know,
Uh-huh. The
right?
yes, but, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good example. Yes, but it's it's a
It's not really
no-go.
an agreement, or it
Yeah.
doesn't make them feel heard. It makes them feel like their thing just didn't matter, kind of, right? Like you're
Right.
missing the whole thing. And so they're still
Yeah.
feeling like nobody understands. Um, and so everything else that comes out of your mouth after that, they're not even open to hearing, because
Right.
like you're not even paying attention to, you don't get what they're saying. So what's something that a parent can say besides yes but, then like when that's your react, like when you're feeling that and you're like wanting to immediately contradict them, what's something that can be perhaps a better response in that moment? Maybe just tell me more might be a good idea.
Yeah, tell me more. Yeah, absolutely. Or you can also say, like, well, can I tell you my opinions then? Can I give you my thoughts? After they've obviously said their piece, then you can say, well,
Got it.
yeah. Well, do you want to hear, or like, do you want to hear what I think?
So that's another thing that was hard for me to hear, was somebody saying, don't just shoot out your advice to them if they didn't ask for it, or if
Mhm.
right, they're like,
Right.
and I told my husband that. He's like, what do you mean? Like, we're the parents, we have to tell them, if we see something that can help or see something that they need to be doing. And that asking, right, and just saying, okay, I heard what you said, can I share whatever, but asking for
Right.
that, you know letting it be their choice to further the conversation in that moment, or perhaps maybe table it until later,
Right.
can make a big difference, I think.
Right.
um
And you were saying about long term too. So I've counseled all ages, right? From like 5 years old up to, adults. And one of the things that I see when adults are like grown-ups that were raised in a home where like push, 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 I gotta accomplish more, more, more. Then as grown-ups, they have a hard time understanding that they understanding themselves and validating who they are. And so they're constantly looking for people's approval. They're constantly looking for people to accept them. They don't know how it feels to belong.
mm,
And so they're like, looking for ways to fill the void. And
mm,
and it's not worth it. Like,
right, yeah.
yeah.
And I think that a lot of people miss that, because you feel like, well, they're achieving, they're learning these things through sports, and so they're going to get it for real life. They're going to be confident. They're going to be this. They're going to be leaders. But like you're
Yeah.
saying, if the whole time the only reason they're pushing themselves is as a response to you, right? Or
Right.
to kind of satisfy you, it's
Yes.
all being done for the wrong reasons. And then
Right.
they don't know how, they don't have, like that you said, like that internal drive, their own desire
Right.
to get out there and do things and push themselves, or strive to be their best just because that's what they want to do. And then be willing to take on whatever failures along the way, because they know that it's part of the journey. But like when someone else, I feel like when someone else is always being that motivation of always pushing, like you never get to discover your own, what you could do. You feel like I always need somebody to tell me this
Yes.
and that. And so
Exactly.
yeah, and so I feel like, and parents, or I hear adults go, yeah, but if I was never pushed, I would have never done it. And I said, that's exactly my point. Like the fact that you're saying that, and that's your belief about yourself, is
That's
exactly why I feel like you need to back off. Like what if that person had just waited and allowed you to come to it in your own time. And then you were able to, like, they would definitely support and encourage you and show their belief in you for sure. But
Right.
what if they let you kind of come around to it on your own time, and then it was your choice and your like you wanted to do it? And yes, it might have taken a little longer, but that's so much more valuable, I think, than somebody pushing you to do it and like, okay, yeah, see, you could do it. And then I knew, and it's
Right.
not your victory in some ways. It's like, then you have this underlying thing like, oh, see, I would have never done it. And I need, somebody else had to do it for me. And it actually doesn't build the confidence that we think it builds by them
Right.
achieving it. So,
Yep. Yep.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's something that we went through as well with one of our kids. It's like we were thinking like we need to make her do this because it's good for her, and she said she has this goal, and so this would tie in perfectly with that. And she
Okay.
totally pushed back. She was like, "No, I'm not going to do it. I don't want to do that." I'm like, "Why won't you do this? Like, this is your
But
goal. This is going to
right.
help you. Like, why?"
So
And
for
she
you
was,
as the mom, it makes sense to
yeah,
you, right?
right. It totally made sense to me. I'm like, "Why wouldn't you
Right.
do this? Like, it's a great opportunity, And she was just adamant. She was just like, "No, I'm not going to do it." And so that was this whole big thing. And then we backed off. We were like, okay, fine. Like, obviously, at this point, she was a teenager. Like, we can't force her to do it. Like, we can't, even if we were to make her do it, she's going to be doing it without her heart in it. It's not really going to be, she's not going to be focused. And eventually, less than a year later, she came to us and she's like, okay, I want to do this, And so then she
That's
did,
great.
and she came around to it. But I sometimes wonder, like, if we hadn't had that big battle up front, maybe she could have came around to it a little sooner, like, you know what I mean? Like, because I think for a while it was just like, oh no, I'm just not going to do it because, there was still some of that conflict going on. And then when enough time had passed and that wasn't a thing anymore, then she was like, okay, I'm going to, because then it felt more like her own decision. So sometimes, so I keep that in mind when I'm like feeling that need to kind of push my kid into something. I'm like, well, maybe if we kind of take like kind of just bigger picture in the grand scheme of things, a few months is not going to make too much of a difference, or what have you.
That's
Maybe
true.
we're going to choose something else entirely, and the whole thing is going to go in a different direction. So really trying to honor their journey and their process has been helpful for me, a lot less stressful.
That's
It's a
yeah.
it's a little, the uncertainty is a little, that's for me to deal with, but because when you push, like, you feel like you have more control of the process and you feel like
Right.
I'm going to make this great outcome happen, but that's kind of not how it works. So, um, so as far as, so you kind of like, you understand a lot of these principles and a lot of these things that I think a lot of parents just don't, they never thought of in that way, because, they were pushed or they see everyone else. That's how everyone does it. So that's what they feel like is what's needed to be like in that
Right.
push, especially in competitive sports. It's just kind of the mentality there.
Yeah.
And to not do it, it's kind of scary. But for you as a parent, knowing everything that you know, what's the most difficult for you to actually execute and actually do? Because like knowing it's one thing, right? But like doing it with your own children,
That's
sometimes
true.
even when I know like what I want to do differently, I don't always do it. So I'm curious, what's one or two things that you've realized, oh my goodness, we need to do this way, and you kind of still have a hard time executing it as a parent?
Right. Um, that's funny because when I would meet, when I was already a therapist before I became a parent.
Mm.
And so just looking back in my journey, like I did not when I first became a mom, I forgot all about and I was like, so I was that mom who was like rigid and like structured. And I was like, what am I doing? And so then and then I said, wait a minute, like I'm not happy with what I'm doing. And is it supposed to be this hard? Like I can't, why am I stressed out every day? And so that's when my husband and I stepped back and we're like, okay, we need to reevaluate and figure out, what it is that we're doing wrong. And so now and then when my clients would tell me like, well, this is how I feel, and then and they're older than my kids, so then I'm like, then I go back and say like, okay, I can't be doing that with my kids, because like they're schooling me in these
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
I'm like, okay, like just for me the hardest part of parenting and then knowing all these things too is really just also like making sure that I don't put my fears mixed in to all these things that at home
Mm-hmm.
that we're doing, because even with knowledge, sometimes fear still
Yeah.
creeps in, and like, okay, wait, am I doing the right thing, or those kind of things. So yeah, and just making sure that I put my own fears in check.
Yeah. And that's a
And
hard one, because I think as parents, there's a lot we're afraid of, right? We're like afraid of
yeah,
bad things happening or whatever, things going down a different path, or like making one wrong choice and it like alter, like their whole life is different. And so, and even with, and a lot of times there are times when we're like, we don't know what to do. Like we don't know what the right answer is, and we don't know what the right response is. And so that's hard. And with every kid, it's a little
yeah,
bit different. And so,
right,
yeah. And so the not knowing exactly what to do now to create the best outcome is difficult. And then the fear can really take over. And I think,
yeah,
yeah. And I express to parents, like, as a parent, someone told me that like we're hardwired to ensure our children's survival. And while we may not need to kill animals or protect them from prey anymore, uh,
right,
this day and age, it's like their survival is more like their success in life. And so when we see that threatened in
yeah,
some way, then we go into this flight or fight mode as a parent, and we're just like, fear takes over, and we go from like they forgot to do a homework assignment to they're going to be dropouts of school and live in our basement forever or something.
yes,
In
yes,
like
yes,
2 seconds, we're like,
yes,
oh my
yes,
goodness, this. And that's how I
that's
felt.
exactly it.
Yeah, that's how I felt with my older kids. Was like every tiny thing for me was like this huge. It turned in my brain. It turned into this massive problem that's going to doom them forever, and that was not helpful for anyone.
Yeah,
To
no, that's exactly it, right? We, as parents, we jump from like A to Z,
right,
and then we don't realize that, as we're talking to our children, we're actually passing that on.
yeah,
And then now there are adults who are like, okay, wait, but what if, that little thing, and then all of a sudden I'm going to be fired and lose my job. And I'm like, wait, where did you get that from, like this?
yeah.
So
Yeah. And so I try to express to them that, look, for one, that's probably normal for your brain to do that because we're parents. But if you could just recognize that that's what's happening, rather than like acting on that, just kind of take a step back and give yourself some
yes,
space to really think it through first, and just to recognize that like this is fear, and not let that run the show. Because I know for me, the things that I worried the most about and like really kind of let myself dwell on, like that stuff ended up happening. And I think that,
ooh, that's a good
yeah,
point.
no, seriously, like when I think
We
back
could do a whole podcast episode on
on
that.
that,
I'm
right?
just kidding.
But I mean, they talk
Yes,
about like what you dwell on and what you think on, and I tell parents, I'm like, that like that fear that you have that this is going to happen is actually probably a
absolutely.
bigger stumbling block or a bigger problem than like that thing that you're scared is going to make this thing happen. So like, because it
Absolutely.
changes how you interact with your child, right? It changes like
Yeah. Yes,
how you
yes,
speak,
yes.
the decisions you make, and then you don't even
Yes.
realize that it causes these. So it's crazy. So yeah, I realized that looking back, like my biggest fears and the things that I was like, oh, I hope this doesn't happen, or these things that just
Right.
came up, like those things ended up happening. And so at least I know some people would be like, well, see, you should have been scared of that. But the way I think of it is like, I think I feel more like it was my fear that caused a lot of, created a lot of situations that didn't have to be there.
Mhm.
And
There,
so,
right.
so I work a
That's a good
lot
point.
on checking myself in that area, right? Like,
Yeah.
what's going on with me? Like, why do I have this fear? Why does this scare me so much? What is the worst that could happen if my kid quit this sport, or if they didn't
Right.
get an A, they got a C instead, or if they're a 2.5 student instead of a 3.2 student, or there's a lot of things that we let become huge things, and then we interact with our children in ways that put distance between us. Like we let
Yeah.
it become a problem within our relationship because
Right.
that thing has become now more important than you. Like I want you to be 3.2 and I'm getting on you and I'm letting that actually be more important than whatever it is. Like, totally bypassing the child. It's like, well, now I'm like, well, what's going on with you? Right? Like, why is this homework like not so important? Like, what's going on with you that you don't feel like doing your homework, or you don't feel like this is important, or you
There you go. Yeah.
like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah.
What is going on in your life that's taking your attention? Are you dealing with
Right.
something that's difficult and it's taking up all your brain power that you just, homework just feels like a small thing compared to this? Maybe they're having a friend issue or relationship issue at school, or
Yeah. Yep.
so, and
Yep.
that's difficult to navigate. So, if we
And
don't
that
know,
is where
yeah,
professionals come in, right?
yeah.
Be like whatever it is, or maybe an accountability group with
Hmm.
other moms to keep you in check,
Yeah.
or like therapy, coaches, counseling, anything.
Hmm.
Because at that point, when we are stressed out, we shouldn't really be talking to our kids. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
they're not there to be our sounding board.
Right.
They're, we can't expect them to bridge the gap for us.
For
So
us.
we need to be talking to another adult who can kind of help us have those tools
Yeah.
that, to evaluate. And one thing too is that, as parents, if we are having to evaluate and reevaluate our strategies, there's nothing wrong with us,
Hmm.
for doing that. In fact, that speaks a lot about our character, that
Yeah.
we're actually willing to say, hold on, I might be doing something wrong. That's
Yeah, or
actually
maybe I could do better, or
yeah.
and I think that's where a lot of our own power is. Instead of like, and I talk to parents about this all the time because they're so frustrated and they're like, oh, but my child this, and if they would just this, and I'm like, well, I'm like, well, like, and like you said, they're not there to be our sounding board. They're also not there to make us feel better, like to take away
Oh
our
my gosh,
frustration,
that is so
right? Or like,
true.
right, like,
Yes.
I need you to do this so that I don't feel frustrated, or so I don't feel stressed.
Oh,
It's like,
yes.
no. Like, right. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah. And so when I realized that, and I'm like, okay, look, my feelings and my emotions are for me to take care of, not for my child to need to achieve something or to be a certain way so that I feel less stressed. Like, that's not their job,
Yep.
you know?
Right.
So, and so, yeah, when I took more ownership of that and not be like, I'm stressed out because of my kids, I'm frustrated because so-and-so, they did this or that. It's like, well, I can do something about how I'm feeling, and I can do something about, okay, how do we go about this better for next time? And so what I see
Right.
a lot of parents doing too is like, well, they did this, so I wanted that. I'm like, well, why don't you just chalk it up as a lesson that whatever happened
Uh-huh.
then didn't go well? And so how can
Yeah.
you do better the next time? Like, what other things need to be put in place? And actually talking with your child about that too is really helpful. Like, I'm a lot more open now to actually work with them to try to find out, like, how can we do this better, versus
That's
thinking like,
great.
I know it all, so you just need to do it my way.
Yeah.
Like,
And like you said,
that
there
can
is
work
a
out.
next time.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
there's always a next time. I think as parents, we feel like, okay, wait, I need to tell them this and this and this and this because I'll never get a chance to. That's not true. That's just your brain
Yeah.
playing tricks on you to say, like, I need to pour everything now or they'll
Right.
never get it.
Right.
Not true.
Yes. And that's another fear, right? Well, if I
Yeah.
don't make them, then they're never going to get this, and it's like, they're 3, you have 18 years.
I know.
I mean, it's short, but it's also 18 years of day in, day out interactions with them, of constantly working with them and getting to know them. And they don't have to be perfect at 3 or 5 or 7, or, they're not going to have it all together. I mean, we're much older than that, and we don't all have, we don't have it all together either. We're constantly learning and growing and getting better. So it's okay for us to
Right.
allow them that process versus needing them to, like, you need to be, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but sometimes, like, when parents are asking, like, well, what's age appropriate, what should they be doing at this age and this age, and I'm like, that's good to know as a guideline, but
Mm-hmm.
like when you take that and then it's like the law, and then your child isn't doing it, and then now you're overreacting and you're trying to, it becomes a problem. And instead of just like,
Right.
oh, well, they're just have a slightly different timeline, like, not every kid walks by 1-year-old, or not every kid crawls by a certain time, and there's a variation. And
Yes.
and
Yes.
allowing and embracing your child as they are, is something that has been helpful for me. So I try to encourage other parents, like, it's okay for you to embrace their journey and that they're not the same as all their peers or they're, you know. So anyway, yeah, thank you for, for talking about that. So one question I like to ask the guests, because I switched the name for the podcast to Eating Curveballs for Breakfast, is what's
I like that.
what's a curveball that life's thrown you, like the biggest one, or maybe a recent one that's been
Ooh.
significant? So like, what's one of the biggest curveballs that life's thrown you, and kind of like, how did it go? So
Okay.
I know you spoke about like doing an overhaul as a parent, or I don't know, maybe there's something else that you feel like there's been a curveball that, I mean, because we get thrown them all the time, especially as moms. So,
Yeah.
or maybe just one that stands out in your mind.
Okay. Oh yeah, I was thinking about I was actually thinking about my journey before we had gone on. The one thing that sticks to me is when as new parents, um, my husband and I, right? So he stayed home, and then I worked in counseling, and with our oldest, and for some reason, like I just felt like I did not connect. I didn't spend enough time connecting with our oldest. And so now this is like my platform. I'm like, you
Yeah.
need to connect because I
Mm-hmm.
have seen it in my own life. And um, one day I had left my husband a note and said, like, okay, can we try this and then this and this? And like, I did a whole schedule of things that he could do with our daughter. And then he texts me back and he's like, you need to stop because you're giving me anxiety. And I was like, oh yeah, I don't want to do that. And so that was kind of like, wait a minute, what am I doing with my family?
Right.
And so that's when the overhaul started. So I was like, okay, I need to figure this out because they're
Yeah.
not happy and I'm obviously not happy.
Right.
So I backed down, and then like we like stripped everything away. Like we used to
Wow.
have like charts, behavior charts, chore charts. We took all of that away, and we just started
All
all
over.
over. Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. So,
And like what you were saying, because right, like parenting experts and books out there would say, like, use a behavior chart and
yeah.
use a chore chart, which I agree. But you said it too, that like, you have to make sure that you are observing your kids first
Yeah.
before you try and implement all those things.
Right.
So are they ready for that? Like,
Yeah.
is that something that's going to work in your family?
Right.
Because it doesn't work all the time. It might be, you might be able to use it later on,
Mm-hmm.
but not at this time, like, yeah, things like that, and being able to adjust too.
And I
So,
think like with the charts and stuff, I think some kids really like seeing their achievement and the progress. And so for
yeah,
them, it's like really helpful. And for other kids, it's more like, and especially it depends on how you implement it and how you
that
communicate it as
too.
well.
Yes.
Because otherwise it feels like some kind of evaluation or some kind of like, I don't know, like a burden for some kids. It turns out to being something that isn't positive for them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like how it's communicated, how you're utilizing it, and understanding your child is always most helpful to you as a parent, rather than like reading an idea and taking just the idea and implementing it without really understanding,
Uh-huh.
the inner workings of why it's beneficial.
Right.
I think any tool, when we use it improperly, becomes more harmful than it is
More
helpful.
harmful.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. And so,
Absolutely.
one more question, because I know I've become more and more aware of families who are dealing with somebody has anxiety or their child has anxious feelings and has, hard time, like teenagers especially. And I think for some of them, it was like their child used to be this happy, bubbly, carefree, confident kid. And then they get into their teen years and then
Yeah.
things kind of shift, and they feel they're more anxious about things. And they're like, I can't do this. Then the parents are like, I don't know how to deal with this because this is not how she used to be. And so, so for parents of kids that have anxiety, or are dealing maybe even with depression, what is maybe one or two helpful things that they should know, that maybe they're not aware of because they've never experienced it before? But like, what are one or two things that maybe they should know or keep in mind as they're trying to work through the situations with their child?
Right. No, that's a good question. I think two things that we can, kind of remember right off the bat is that, number one, your kids, just like you, just like we do, also have internal dialogues that are happening in their mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure the parents who are listening or watching, you know that, like, sometimes when you make mistakes, you have a default and you say, oh man, then you start to, like,
Mm-hmm.
have this, like, self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
Your kids have that too. And when there is depression, when anxiety or depression are present in them, that internal dialogue leans toward negative things.
Mm-hmm.
And so just be aware that, like, they're they are, having that self-talk within them. And so, which leads me to the second part, that we have to remember that trying to fix it for them is more harmful than it is helpful in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
So if they tell you, like, oh, I feel like, when there's depression, right, I feel that I'm not good enough. And then what do we say?
Yes, you are.
That's not true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And we're contradicting their feeling. Like,
Are.
yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so if they are coming to you with their feelings, and they're very open about it, validate it and say, okay, I hear you. I
Mm-hmm.
hear you. I'm here to listen.
Mm-hmm.
I'll stand by you as long as you want me to, and I'm not gonna try and fix anything for you until you are open
Mm-hmm.
about it, and then we can do something about it. But um, just again, having that discussion with them, and make sure that you're not shutting them down
Yeah.
anything. Or the worst thing that we could do is also say, like, well, what could you be stressed about, or what could you be
Yeah.
depressed about? You're
Yeah.
17.
Yeah. And that's what I heard too, is like,
Okay.
you don't have any problems right now. You don't have,
Right.
right? Like, you're doing good. And sometimes these people, these student athletes, they're doing great in school, they're doing great in sports, and everyone around them is going, what's the problem? Like, what?
Yes.
And so they feel like more, and I'm like, just listen. Like, just, sometimes all you can do in those moments when they're having a tough time is just say, like, I'm here, I'm
Yes.
listening,
Right.
and
You could
that's
even say, I don't understand what you're going through, but
right. Yeah.
I'm willing to understand it, and but don't try and go and fix it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
And
Like, or another thing that parents say is, oh, just get over it.
yes, right. Suck it up or whatever.
Yeah.
That's very common in sports.
Yeah.
That's always what's said, right? Like, you can't just quit because it's hard. You can't just, and it's like, well, if they could do better, they probably would be, like, there's something going on, and they really, for them, it feels so real and so big.
Right.
So,
And maybe they and the same way that we get frustrated and stressed out, they do too. So maybe that's the first thing that came out of their mouth, is like, oh, I want to quit. Or
right,
maybe they don't mean it.
right.
So give them a chance to explain what that means.
Yeah. And again, like, really getting to know, like, what's going on with you. What's,
Yeah.
what's causing you to feel all of this angst that you're feeling. And again, and validate. So I read this book called Let Them Play, and the author Jerry Lynch talks about listen, love, LUV, listen, understand, validate. And so with your kids, and he's like,
Yeah.
I'm like, notice there's no F for fix or
Yeah.
or T for correct, or it's like,
Oh,
listen,
I love it.
understand,
Yes.
validate. That's all. There's only 3 letters there, So and that's really hard to do. And so something I heard you say on Shaki's podcast, and we'll wrap this up real quick because I know we're going a little long, but you said to let your kids have the last word. And
Yes.
and that's hard, I think, for a lot of parents. So can you expand on that a little bit more?
Sure. Now, obviously it's it has to be situation appropriate. Like, I'm not
Right.
saying like if
Like,
there
it's
is,
not a blanket statement. Yeah.
yeah, like if it's if it's a serious situation, then we have to use our discretion. But having or letting your kids have the last word is basically like, when they feel good about themselves, please don't add anything more. Like, don't that's not the times when they're like, oh, I feel so good, I got a good game, like, but you're over here. I understand, once again, I understand, like, maybe you're thinking like, okay, maybe they didn't, their form wasn't right, right, like, or like they could have done better, like, but if they are feeling good about themselves, like, let them have it, and let them take pride in their work. And I was talking to a mom the other day, and her daughter had raised her grade from an F to a D.
Mm.
But now, if you hear that, you're like, well, okay, it's an F to a D, but it's still a D. But she didn't let the daughter finish that. She actually got 100 on that one test. That's how she raised it. So if
Wow.
you say like, oh, well, I mean, she got 100,
Yeah.
so, but how would you know that if you don't let them? And that was one of the situations where mom was like, that's great, but you still got to raise it up.
Right. Yeah.
I
Yes.
get it. I know. She knows that.
I was gonna
She knows
say a
she
lot of
has.
times the kids know that, right? But
Right.
they're also much better than we are at celebrating what's working, like it's
Oh,
celebrating the thing
absolutely.
that's going
Absolutely.
well, and we're like
Yeah.
all focused on the thing that we're like, but, and so I'm letting my kids teach me how to celebrate the
Oh, that's a
positive
good one.
stuff,
Yeah.
and really, and like I feel like I'm a positive person, but I think like with my kids especially, it's been so easy to slip into seeing what's not going right and wanting to harp on that and focus on
Right.
that and dwell on that versus,
Right.
you know, looking at what's working and building on that, or identifying maybe an issue and then just immediately looking towards solutions or working with them to
Yes.
see, okay, so what are you doing next, right? Like, or what's the next step
Right.
for you? And then kind of letting them say, okay, yeah, so I got 100 on this test, and then we've got this coming up, and so I'm working on this project, I'm going to finish this up, I've got some extra credit that I'm doing, like, and just kind of let them
Exactly.
focus on that. But so yeah, it's definitely a work in progress, and it's a fun journey for sure. So much learning when you're a mom
Yeah. So
and a
much learning.
sports
That's so
mom.
true.
Yeah. So is there anything else you would like parents to hear before we wrap it up?
Um, my last word would be just really spend time, connect. If you want to make an impact in your child's life, and you are,
Right.
as parents, we do have that impact. And if we spend more time connecting with them, you won't ever have to doubt yourself if you're raising, you know, good kids, because you will know from that connection that you are making an impact. And so if you want to make an impact, spend time connecting with them rather than correcting them all the time.
That's a big one. And that's not something I understood before. Like, I felt like I was supposed to be always correcting, right? Because like isn't that what a
Right.
parent does? So that's been a
I,
shift for me as well. And I can say, I know some parents are worried about like, well, how am I going to teach them if I'm not supposed to, whatever. And it's not that you have this attitude of like everything is good and we don't talk about any of the bad stuff. It's not that. But what I have seen when I've followed some of the little nuggets of listening,
mm-hmm.
and allowing them to talk and not giving advice when they're not even asking for it or ready to hear it. What I have found is that by being someone who's willing to listen and willing to try to understand versus just feel like you just need to do it my way, it doesn't matter what you feel or think, because that's kind of what they end up feeling. It's like
Right.
you're just trying to tell them what to do and they feel bossed around, and nobody likes to be bossed around. So but what I found is that,
Yes.
yeah, by being willing to listen and really get to know them and making that a priority, and really wanting to understand what's going on in their minds and what's going on in their day, um, that they have come to me more to ask
Exactly.
or
Exactly.
to express, this is what's going on, or I'm frustrated with this, or whatever. And that's been really eye-opening. And honestly,
Yeah.
it's so much more fun and
Yes.
so meaningful. Like when your teenagers are coming to you to ask questions about the biggest issues that they're going through, like that's a big deal for me. Like that's not something that was
Right.
happening before. And so
Yeah.
I just wanted to encourage parents out there that have that fear, like, I need to control it. I need to make sure I need to be in charge and do this and do this and do this and make sure that they don't mess up, because that's how I used to feel.
Right.
It's scary to let that go, to make that shift and be like,
For
really,
sure.
yeah. But it's been worth it for me. So I
Yeah.
just wanted to say that for parents who are thinking about it, but like scared or not sure how it's going to work out, or
Right.
that's you don't know. So yeah, I just wanted to say that it's been a very worthwhile experience, and something that I sometimes say I wish I'd known sooner, but honestly I think that I wasn't
It came
ready to listen
at
for
the right
that
time.
yet.
Yeah.
I just was
Yeah.
like, no, everything's going well, like I got this, and then my children really, like you were saying, like you weren't happy, they weren't happy, and you realize, wait, what's going on here? And there has to be something else that can be done. And so yeah, and I just wanted to encourage parents that it's actually really amazing when you work on that
Yeah.
relationship and you focus on building that, and that's more important than the exact grade they get, or that's more important than
Uh-huh.
whether or not they start on this team, or it's more important than their batting average, or all of these things. And
Right.
and of course in your heart you feel like, yes, of course they're the most important thing, but sometimes the way we communicate it to them, it's not feeling that way, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you. If people want to like connect with you on Facebook, you have a Facebook page. What else is a good way
Yes.
to? So what is the Facebook page that you have?
It's Best Parenting Practices.
Okay.
Um, and then I'm also on Instagram. My handle is Joy Acaso.
Okay.
And my website is www.joyacaso.com/15 ways to affirm.
Oh yes. And so that's a guide that you have, right?
Yes.
Okay. And parents can download that
And
at the
download
website.
it. It's free.
And I think you also have a link to that on the Facebook page too, right? If they find you on Facebook,
Yes, I do.
there's a link to that as well. Okay, so
That's
thank you
true.
so
Yeah.
much, Joy. I appreciate your
Thank
time. And
you.
we'll have to come back and talk about some of the other stuff more
I
deeply
know.
down the road. But thank you so much for being
Absolutely.
here. I'm glad we connected. And
Thank
I hope
you.
that some parents will go over and check out your Facebook page and stay connected with you as well.
Definitely.
Thank
I love this. This was great. Thank you so
you.
much.
I
Thank you for
appreciate
having
it.
me.
All right. Thank you.
Thank